Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As I'm sure you've noticed if you've been with us for a couple minutes, I just keep dropping a couple links into the chat for those who are still joining. You'll see attendance there. You'll want to make sure that you sign in so that you get credit for being here with us this evening. You'll also see a document there for breakout rooms. We want to give you opportunities to work with one another this evening and to process and explore a few things together. So we're asking that you will add your name there under your grade level. And then you'll also see a link to the lead educator resources as well. The same document that we linked in our email to you so that you can access the handouts and some of the other relevant links that we'll be talking about this evening. I think I'm going to drop that into the chat one more time. I think we had a couple more people come. And then we will jump into some of the housekeeping things and just get started this evening. So just in case there's anybody new on here, my name is Amanda Nickerson. I am a literacy consultant at the Stark County Educational Service Center, and I'm here with my friend Janelle Rodacker, who is another consultant, and we're excited to talk to you tonight about writing. This is not going to be a comprehensive conversation about writing. Those of you who've been a part of this network for a couple years, you'll notice that there are going to be a few things that overlap with content from before, but we're kind of building on what we've shared in the past, and we'll kind of keep coming back and deepening our understanding of how all of this connects over time. So we're not going to go deeply into handwriting tonight, though we'll touch on it. And we're not going to talk about the writing revolution and some of those things that we've talked about in the past, though that's still important. We're going to introduce something new to you tonight, and we're excited to engage in this conversation. So we just wanted to congratulate you for making it to the end of the Lead Educator Network with us. We know it's a commitment to show up to these meetings after school, whether you come once or whether you come all 4 times. So thank you for making this a priority and for coming to learn alongside of us. I know I speak for Janelle when I say, we've learned so much from working with all of you as well through these conversations, through our preparation for these meetings, and in the times that we get to occasionally go out into the district and see you all in action. It's just been an honor to do this work alongside all of you. So we have a note-taking template here on this slide for you. And again, you can get to that through those lead educator resources that are in the chat. Maybe I'll drop that in one more time. In the PDF that's in that spreadsheet, you'll be able to access this note-taking template if it's something that you want to use. You'll notice we have our presentation linked there. We have our resource repository that we've shared with you linked there. We have continued to link the Ohio Dyslexia course for your convenience. And then you'll see some things that are relevant to our conversation tonight listed here. So we're going to talk quite a bit about self-regulated strategy development, something called SRSD. It's the most researched writing strategy out there that has a lot of evidence behind it. So we're going to talk about that. We'll give you some time to explore some strategies with your grade level. We're going to zoom in on one strategy, PAL plus TREE tonight, and you'll get to work with a team of teachers as well to kind of summarize one step of that lesson with us. And then we're going to look at the importance of self-talk and really building self-regulation strategies within our students. That's really the magic sauce, if you will, for this particular approach that we'll be discussing tonight. Just out of curiosity, if you've been coming to the meetings, I'm going to drop this in the chat again. Sorry for those of you that just keep hearing me ping away. But out of curiosity, I'd love to know if you are using this template. It only takes a couple minutes for Janelle and I to make, but certainly, as you all know, every minute counts for all of us. So if you're not using it, that's fine. If you take notes other ways, that's fine. But if you are using it, we'd love to know, just so that next year we know if it's worth those few minutes that we're taking to put this together each time. So you can just feel free to put in like, yes, we're using it, or no, we're not, just so that we have kind of an idea. All right. And again, just to reiterate, we really just put together that note-taking sheet for you. There's no expectation that you're sharing it back with us, but we just know that it takes time when you're sharing this back within your districts. And we were hopeful that this could help you put some of your thoughts and notes in one place to make it a little bit more shareable. Maureen, that note-taking template is in the PDF of this presentation. Let me see if I can jump in real quick and grab it for you. It'll just take me a second to get to that link. Okay, I'm going to share the presentation directly. I'm just grabbing the link right now. This just shows where we were this year, the things that we covered. So as you know, if you've been with us for all 4 meetings, we started this year in September looking at the full literacy block and just talking through how much time we're allocating for each of those components of literacy instruction. We zoomed in a little bit on word recognition in November. We looked specifically at just a few strategies that we have put into that one resource document that we've shared with our ACE network and that we'd love for you all to be able to utilize as you plan your lessons. And in January, we zoomed in a bit on language comprehension and just a couple strategies that can be used to support that part of your block. Today, we're going to zoom in on writing just a little bit. And again, this is not comprehensive. This is just a starting point of a conversation. But we really just wanted to introduce you to a new approach that can be used with any program. It's really just a strategy that we can layer on top of the great things that we're already doing, which is something that makes it really appealing, I think. So we're going to just chat real quick about how this is really anchored in MTSS and that structure that we have within our buildings, recognizing that everything begins with a high quality tier 1 program. We are focused on growing all learners using that district grade level curriculum, high quality evidence-based instruction, and ensuring that all students receive differentiated support. So students who struggle with reading, students who are at grade level, and students who are performing above grade level. We're trying to make sure that we're closing gaps, that we are supporting grade level skill development, and that we're also providing increased breadth and depth as needed. And sometimes, right, for some kids, we're doing all of this. It doesn't mean that for some kids, we're closing gaps, and for some, we're giving them depth and complexity. For many of our kids, we're doing all of this. It just depends on that particular skill that we're working on at that time. You know, how supportive, how many scaffolds, or how much enrichment we're providing. And today, we're going to continue to talk about what to teach and the quality of instruction as it pertains to writing. So we have talked throughout the year a little bit about structured literacy as it pertains to all of those different components of literacy instruction. And today we're going just to look at how it pertains to writing. As you all know, structured literacy is explicit, it's diagnostic, it's systematic, and it's cumulative. And because writing is really the culmination of everything that we ask kids to do in our language arts classrooms, it should not be surprising that it really involves all of the things that you see on this graphic. Writing involves sound symbol correspondences, knowledge of syllables and morphology, knowledge of syntax, and knowledge of semantics, right? Making sense of the world and being able to communicate those ideas through writing. And some of you have seen this graphic for a long time. We're starting to color code things a bit more here for each of those components as we organize materials for you. So that's really the biggest difference here. But what I've basically done is take the 5 components of literacy, those pillars that were identified by the National Reading Panel. We've turned this into the stairway to success because we know that those first couple steps are so important. We need our students to have firmly anchored, automatized phonemic awareness and phonics skills. That includes, spelling and morphology, so that they can read with fluency. And as they read with fluency, they are equipped then to read more independently, to grow their vocabulary and their comprehension. And then all of that really supports writing. And if you think about what we do on state assessments and what we require students to demonstrate as a proficiency level, we really test those upper steps. We tend to see questions about vocabulary, comprehension, and writing. And in recent years, over the last, let's say, 8 to 10 years, we've seen an increasing emphasis on writing multi-paragraph essays in response to really complex grade level text. So writing is really predicated and built on top of all of these other things that we see, all of these other steps, all of these other parts of our block. And if we expand our view of writing using Jones-Sedita's writing rope, you'll see all of these different things that we ask kids to learn about and to apply when they're writing. And if you start with the bottom of the rope, we're really looking at the foundational skills. So it's kind of similar to Scarborough's reading rope, where the bottom is really the foundation. So we see things here like spelling and handwriting or keyboarding as our kids are becoming older. We see things like writing craft, like word choice, awareness of task, audience, and purpose, literary devices. We want our students to understand text structure, both with respect to genre, like the narrative, informational, or opinion structures, and paragraph structure. We want them to start to recognize those patterns of organization. So to be able to both identify and use language that helps readers know that the text is describing something or sequencing something or showing a cause and effect relationship, comparing and contrasting, or showing a problem and solution. And we want them also to recognize and use linking in transition words and phrases. And with respect to syntax, we want them to, again, recognize and use grammar and syntactic awareness, to be able to elaborate sentences, to appropriately use punctuation. And we also want them to engage in critical thinking. And that especially comes to bear on the process of generating ideas and gathering information, and also on that writing process, organizing, drafting, writing, revising. So writing is a very complicated, multi-pronged, multi-strand activity that we ask our kids to do. And all of us know as well-educated adults that writing is challenging even for us, right? So explicit instruction is going to be important so that our students are equipped for this task. And on this slide, we've shown you that shifting emphasis multiple times as it pertains to those reading components. We're going to look at it tonight through that writing lens. So everything that is outlined in pink emphasizes writing in the classroom across those grade levels, K-5 and beyond. So if we think about phonics and word study, it's still important for writing because, as you might recall from that other slide that showed the writing rope, spelling is really important. It is a foundational writing skill. So even in kindergarten, as we're teaching those basic phoneme, grapheme correspondences, as you're beginning to write CVC words, as you're beginning to teach blends or digraphs, as we begin to teach advanced phonics and multisyllabic words, or as we begin to work on morphemes and expand our vocabulary through multisyllabic word study, we want to be asking our students to write words, to write phrases, to write sentences that demonstrate that ability to spell. We do not want to shortchange spelling instruction because it is such an important foundational skill. So that's kind of an overlap between that phonics component and in writing. And you'll notice that in that vocabulary and comprehension section, from second grade through fifth, we see a greater emphasis on writing as we think about our vocabulary instruction and our comprehension instruction, where we're writing in response to text as well. And so certainly writing is part of these other sections of our block. It's not always only this discrete section of our reading block that's isolated and disconnected from the other things that we're doing. We're certainly writing throughout the entire ELA block and hopefully across all of our content areas in response to the material that we're working on and that critical content. However, if you look at the way that we've been talking about prioritizing our instructional time in Tier 1, you'll see again that 10 to 15 minutes in K2 for phonemic awareness, 45 minutes for phonics, and 60 minutes for vocabulary and comprehension. And to the left, where we have this big circle, you see that additional 30 minutes of writing. And so again, if you think about the slide that I just showed, we're writing across the entire 90 minutes or 120 minutes of our literacy block when we're teaching reading, when we're teaching phonics and those language comprehension skills. There's writing involved. And yet, we know that research supports this additional 30 minutes of writing for our students. That really helps us to focus on the compositional aspects of writing to communicate our own ideas or to summarize a text. All right, so we are going to give you just a moment here to reflect. And you can feel free to unmute and raise your hand if you have something that you'd like to just talk about, or you can put it into the chat if that works better for you. We just want to give you a moment to pause and reflect on your current writing instruction. What does it include? What are the great things you are already doing? And maybe what are the writing skills that students in your grade level struggle with the most? If you answer that second question, whether you unmute or put it in the chat, I'd love if you would identify your grade level so that we have a clear picture of those challenges and whether there are common challenges emerging at certain points on that continuum. So I'm just going to pause. I'll give you a chance to, again, raise your hand to speak or put your thoughts into the chat. Okay, I'm seeing Maggie saying elaboration is challenging. Michelle saying kids are struggling with topic sentences. I would say when I was still teaching 3rd and 4th grade, I saw a lot of kiddos struggling with elaboration in particular. But sort of to illustrate that point I was speaking about earlier, you know, I still had kids who were in 4th grade who struggled a lot with transcription, who struggled a lot with handwriting, who struggled a lot with spelling. And so for those kids who were still struggling to write down the paper and use those lines as guardrails, who were writing sideways with letter-like symbols that sometimes looked like letters and sometimes didn't, it was a lot harder for them to focus on elaboration than it was for my kids who had those skills down pat. And so that's, again, just a big consideration. We need to make sure we're teaching some of those skills really explicitly in those other portions so that we have the space and time and our kids have the cognitive space to focus on those big high-level skills like elaboration. Anyone else want to unmute or speak? I'm going to read through your notes real quick in the chat. You might want to check out what your colleagues are saying as well. All right, so seeing lots of different things in the chat. Thank you for sharing. And we will take a look at that as we look ahead to next year as well to inform the work that we'll be doing together. All right, so tonight we're going to take a look at something that possibly some of you may already do. It was kind of newer to me, I'll be honest. A couple years ago, I came across SRSD, and I did not study special education. So those of you who did, you may have more familiarity with this than others, than those of us who came through more of a gen ed program or experiences. I ended up seeing this over and over again, and I kept thinking, I'm going to come back to that. I want to learn more about it, because what was always written in these articles that would mention SRSD is how highly researched it was and the high effect size that it continually gets for a range of grade levels, like K through 12, which is remarkable to me. And for like kids who struggle, kids who are in grade level, they've done a little less research with kids who are gifted or advanced, but the studies they've done that have included all kids have shown that it's been beneficial for all. They just haven't looked at it as a distinct population at this time. And they've looked at it in small group with individuals as whole class. So it's a really, really flexible approach that Janelle and I are really excited to kind of walk through with you tonight as another tool for your tool belt. And this is called self-regulated strategy development. It was developed by Karen Harris and Steve Graham. Those of you who read a lot on writing might recognize the name Steve Graham, because he is like the Michael Jackson of writing research. You can't read writing research without stumbling upon Steve Graham. So as we look at this, I think this graphic is helpful to kind of anchor our understanding of what self-regulated strategy development is. And it's essentially an evidence-based approach for helping students learn specific strategies for planning, drafting, and revising text. It's also characterized by explicit teaching, individualized instruction, and criterion-based versus time-based learning. It is an approach that involves teaching students to internalize positive self-talk, which is, I think, one of the most powerful parts of this, as evidenced by the research. And it helps kids memorize strategies that operationalize the complexities of writing step by step. I can see this being really helpful for those of you who are preparing kids for state assessments. So this graphic shows 3 gears, and each one is a key component of SRSD. This gear metaphor is really purposeful because it's through the work of all 3 gears that the system actually works well and works successfully. SRSD is an effective practice because of all 3 main components together. That top gear on the left emphasizes the specific strategies that students are taught, and those could be genre specific or more general. And if you jump over to the gear on the right, you'll notice that there are a series of 6 instructional stages that are used to teach these strategies. So each strategy is explicitly taught using a series of flexible steps that we'll take a look at in a little bit. And the goal of using these specific stages of instruction is to build student skill until they're using the strategy independently. That middle gear indicates that SRSD also uses self-regulation strategies that are taught so that students can learn to regulate and manage those complexities of writing. And you'll see that strategy instruction is also a core component. And its success is really amplified in the delivery of this instruction, plus the integration of those self-regulation strategies. As we all know, writing is really, really complex. And that's why these 3 components are purposefully integrated to help students manage those demands. So we are going to briefly dip our toes into research that supports this. We're going to look at just a couple theoretical models that are pertinent to this approach. And we're going to begin with the simplest that some of you probably have some familiarity with if you've been through Letters Module 8. So this is a simple view of writing. It's a theoretical framework that conceptualizes skilled writing as the product of 2 necessary sets of skills, kind of similar to the simple view of reading. So you see lower level transcription skills like handwriting, keyboarding, and spelling, and then text generation, which encompasses words, sentences, and text level writing. This model is really useful for doing what its name implies. It provides a simple view of what's necessary for skilled writing. So if students have amazing ideas and a way with words, but their paper is illegible or littered with misspelled words, as we all know, that intended message can be partially or even completely obscured or compromised. On the other hand, if students have beautiful handwriting and excellent spelling, but they struggle with text generation, perhaps they produce a series of fragments and run-ons, or they use imprecise vocabulary, or they don't have a clear organizational structure or focus, it doesn't matter how pretty their handwriting is, the quality of the composition will be impacted and it will be a negative impact. So as it relates to classroom instruction and interventions, the simple view of writing makes a lot of practical sense, and it's helpful because it helps us break down elements of writing that are teachable, that we can do something about. Transcription and text generation are absolutely essential components, but it's also important to recognize that skilled writing in actuality is a little bit more complicated than that. Just like when we talk about the simple view of reading, there are lots of things at play, and these are just big domains. So we can take a look at the not so simple view of writing. That's the actual name. So this was developed to expand upon the original framework by adding and emphasizing the role of cognitive processes. You'll notice in this model that transcription and executive function serve as the foundation. And this model basically recognizes that students need sufficient lower level transcription skills, and they also need sufficient executive functioning skills in order to have a great enough proportion of their working memory to attend to those higher level text generation skills, to actually be able to write and communicate an idea that's coherent. When students lack those sufficient lower level transcription skills, or they lack or struggle with executive functioning skills, this taxes their working memory, and then that impedes text generation, which results in diminished writing performance. The not so simple view of writing aligns with research examining areas of writing difficulty for students with disabilities, and you'll see that on this slide. Findings indicate that students commonly struggle with transcription, sentence level writing, text generation, and motivation. You see those categories across the top. Fortunately, within each area, we know that there are specific instructional goals that can be identified, and there are specific things we can do to remediate those difficulties. While all four areas are essential, you'll notice that two of the columns are highlighted, those two on the right, because SRSD is an instructional approach that primarily addresses students' challenges with text generation through planning and revising and editing, as well as motivation. And that's that part that is so different about this strategy, because it addresses self-regulatory strategies and equips students to engage in self-talk. And we're going to spend some more time later in the presentation talking about all of those practical implications. For now, we're going to take a brief look at how this all connects to two prominent cognitive models of writing. There will not be a quiz on this afterwards, so you can breathe a sigh of relief because this looks really complicated. I'm going to try to keep this fairly high level in terms of how deeply we look at this. But it's pretty well established that proficient writers have to integrate multiple skills, strategies, and techniques in order to produce a quality piece of writing that communicates an intended message. And that's really what I want you to take away from this. If you look at the original cognitive model of writing, which is by Hayes and Flower, that's on the left, it shows three processes. And I've actually I've highlighted the one in pink. So it will look really familiar to you because we tend to focus a lot on planning and translating and reviewing and monitoring those processes as we're teaching students to write. That is important. And in their model, they showed that all of those things were being impacted by the external and internal factors involved in the classroom, like the task environment and long-term memory. But then they thought, I don't think that really completely communicates the complexities of writing. So they revised it. And they have this new model on the right-hand side. And it shows some additional external and internal factors that are involved in writing. And it shows basically that writing's impacted by the social environment, it's impacted by the physical environment, it's impacted by long-term memory and how we're able to retrieve that information from our brain. It's impacted by cognitive processes, by working memory, by motivation, and even affect. And so lots of things are going on when we're writing. And that's really the big takeaway. That big takeaway is that writing is multifaceted and complex, and students have to be able to simultaneously attend to various processes in order to write well. And this is daunting work, even for skilled writers, even as I said, for those of us who are teachers, who are well educated people who spend our whole lives in school. Writing is hard work. So, this cognitive model really reinforces the importance of addressing executive functions like planning and editing and revising and those self-regulatory strategies. And all of that's really relevant to this approach, SRSD. And as we've discussed before, writing is arguably the most difficult language skill. It places really huge demands on our working memory. We don't simply plan, write, review, and revise in this very linear, neat fashion. Writers work recursively through these stages. We write, we reread, we think, oh, I think I could say that better, or oh, I don't really mean it that way. I need to change this word, or oh, if I use an exclamation point, that'll convey some emotion that I want to have here, right? We're making all these little cumulative decisions as we write. And kids are doing the same thing, but we have to teach them how to do it well, and we have to manage some other skills that work in the background. They have to be able to manage transcription, sentence level writing, text generation, and motivational considerations. So I love this quote by Louisa Moats. She has said that writing is a mental juggling act that requires simultaneous and alternating attention to idea generation, planning and organization, translation of ideas into language, transcription of language into print, and also the cognitive flexibility that allows editing and revision. So just really briefly before we move on, I want you just to drop your thoughts into the chat. What has stood out to you so far? How does what we've learned, even about these theoretical models, connect to what you experience as a teacher in your classroom? Just take a moment to process, and we will move on. I'm going to wrap up a few things, and then Janelle's going to start getting us into the really practical parts of making this work in our classroom. So again, the question is, how does this all relate to what you have experienced as educators? Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Writing is complex. It can be challenging for students of all ability levels. Mandy takes so many working parts. That's something that contributes to students struggling. Daniel, thank you. You're connecting it to how fluency is a combination of various skills being applied at once. Yeah, we want our students to have some fluency with these skills when they're writing as well. All right. You can continue to process that and put in some thoughts as we continue on. I'm going to sort of expand on this a little bit more. Some of you have seen this before. You might have heard it from me. You might have heard it from William Van Cleve, who actually came up with this wonderful metaphor. Maybe you've heard it from Michelle Elia in one of her trainings. But I love this idea of thinking about the writing brain as a stove. Because these back burner skills are things we want our students to be able to do automatically without actively thinking about them. And the front burner skills are things that we want them to attend to consciously. But those are the things that involve working memory. So one of our goals with handwriting in particular, as we think about some of those other skills that are prerequisites, we want it to be moved from the front burners to the back burners where it's running automatically. If you're taking notes right now by chance with a pen and a paper, you're probably not saying, now I'm going to make an H. And you're probably not thinking like, what does that look like? How do I make my hand do that? You're probably not saying the strokes to yourself. that would make it really difficult for you to attend to what I'm saying. If we think about some of our primary kiddos in kindergarten, in first grade, maybe even second grade as they're learning cursive, this is something that they are grappling with, right? They're trying to communicate ideas while also thinking about how to do the mechanical parts of writing. So part of their working memory is committed to forming the letters, going in the right direction, and also expressing their ideas in a way that helps their reader understand what they're saying. When they begin to write a letter or a word or a sentence, part of their attention is focused on how to form that letter. And that's okay if they're in kindergarten, right? And they're starting to think about how to form that letter. Maybe they're doing a dictation exercise or they're writing a couple sentences for a writing assignment. That's fine. It becomes really problematic for a 10-year-old to still be focused on letter formation, especially as we begin to expect them to write longer, more complex texts. That poor handwriting bogs down the process. It impacts their vocabulary that they use. It impacts the quality of their writing. So in order to be proficient, that developing writer has to be able to automatize skills to free up space for other processes. Because composition demands high-level problem solving and decision making, it has to be placed on the front burner. Um, but it can be vulnerable to disruption, to overload, and faulty processing. So that's why we see sometimes that students may have seemed to have grasped a component skill like capitalization. But then once we start combining all these skills together and we're asking them to do it during composition, that system can fail. We don't see the punctuation show up, right? And so I've said before, this is kind of like a pot boiling over at best, or at worst for some of our students, it's like a raging fire that's a little bit out of control. They have like a little bit of an SOS situation. So we have things that we can do to help a reader manage all of this and free up their cognitive stovetop. So this is just a reminder as we talk more about composition tonight and share some strategies, we also want to continue to automatize handwriting and spelling so that we can maximize the 30 minutes that we have allocated for writing instruction. And this just shows, again, that building that cognitive system requires us to strengthen those component skills so that we can just really focus on audience, purpose, form, all of those things that we want kids focusing on as writers. And again, you can see that the foundational writing skills are on the back burner so that we can focus on text generation. So, Janelle, I'm going to hand it off to you, my friend.
All right. So before we get into looking at some of the practicalities of this and application at the classroom level, we'll just take a few minutes here and we will look at some of the relevant research specifically related to SRSD, which is what the rest of our evening will kind of be grounded in. So Amanda, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide for me. Thank you. So this slide that you see here shows research that's evaluating the effectiveness of some specific writing instructional approaches as it relates to student outcomes. So, what the research says is that SRSD has the strongest evidence base of all the researched writing approaches. And it has consistently positive impacts, like Amanda had mentioned earlier, across multiple age ranges and across, various populations of students, including those with students with disabilities or with learning disabilities. So this slide is showing you some meta-analysis data. So that's data that's from multiple different studies. And it is showing you some effect sizes. And you can see at the bottom of the slide there, anything that is 0.8 or greater is considered really strong, right? It has this really large effect. And so if you look at the first box up in the left-hand corner, this is linked to Writing Next by Graham and Perrin. And what they did is they compiled many writing instructional strategies. And what they found were 11 practices with research that supports the teaching of writing to students, specifically in grades 4 through 12. And what they found is that when specific writing strategies are utilized, you can see that it has this effect size of 0.82, right? But then when you fold in and integrate these SRSD strategies that we're going to take a look at more closely this evening, you see that that effect size increases greatly and it becomes 1.14. And you can see that when considering instruction that doesn't fold in those strategies and integrate those strategies, it still has a decent effect size, right? A moderate effect size, but it's just not as large as you see when you're folding in and utilizing those SRSD strategies. Similarly, if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, you can see that this is another meta-analysis. It differed slightly from the writing next analysis in that they focused on approximately 115 studies, and with that came 13 different strategies. And in this case, it was applicable to students grades 1 through 6. And so this is where you can see what I mentioned earlier, that this really does span across all grade levels. But you can see still some very high effect sizes. So when we use specific strategy instruction with writing, you have this really strong effect size. But when you fold in and integrate these SRSD strategies that we're going to look at, you can see that that effect size just increases and becomes even larger. And so really what this is just articulating to us as educators is that SRSD really is an evidence-based approach to teaching writing that's not only highly researched, but it has these consistently positive results that we have to pay attention to and that we can't ignore because it really does make an impact on student outcomes. Mandy, you can go to the next slide. So this quote really from Graham that Amanda mentioned his name before this evening just really captures the intent of SRSD. And so this idea of the teaching of goal setting, self-assessment, and other self-regulation procedures as part of strategy instruction is one way in which SRSD differs from other strategy instructional approaches. So we really want to pay attention to this idea that, we're teaching students how to self-regulate while writing so that they are able to free up their cognitive desk space along with those transcription skills that Amanda has been mentioning all throughout the evening. So they are able to generate text that has meat to it, that has, flow and ideas and brings in word choice and all of those other complex writing tasks that we want students to be able to do. When you think about writing in general, in education, we are fairly successful at utilizing graphic organizers to get students to plan for writing, right? It's kind of like the hallmark of our pre-writing. But what really sets SRSD apart is this component of self-regulation. And so that's one of the things we want to pay attention to tonight as you dig into some of the strategies. Go ahead, Amanda, you can go to the next slide. The other aspect that is really important to consider when we think about SRSD is that you're going to notice that it really draws out this idea of utilizing mnemonics. And the mnemonics are important because they support memorization and utilization of some of the different desired strategies through self-regulation. And so you're going to notice when you explore the strategies further that there's going to be a lot of these things woven together. And you're really going to want to pay attention to that because the goal of these strategies is that students they take ownership of these strategies and it becomes part of their toolbox. So when they're writing and you're not there, they have this toolbox and they can go to that toolbox and figure out exactly what they need, pull it out, use it when they need it. and it doesn't require legwork on your part, if that makes sense. Amanda, is there anything you want to add to that part?
No, I think like if anything, I would just say mnemonics are something that has a really robust effect size too from John Hattie's meta-analyses. I don't recall it off the top of my head, but we know like just in general, mnemonics are really helpful. Like those embedded picture mnemonics when you're teaching the alphabet, Linnea Airy found those were helpful. So this is just another expression of or application of the use of mnemonics that are really helpful for students.
Good connection. So the strategies that we're going to take a look at this evening comes from the Powerful Writing Strategies for All Students. And so you can see that that's where we pulled a or all of our strategies from for this evening. But the point is that we want to think about, we've been talking about the theoretical models and the research specifically from Writing Next. And now we really want to consider, how does this translate to classroom practice? And that's where these resources come into play. They're really user friendly and easy to use. You can go to the next slide, Amanda. It's fine. They're really easy, and they're user friendly for teachers because everything you need is right there at your fingertips. And so we are going to start to look at some of the specifics of the SRSD strategy. So
Yeah, and if I may, Janelle, I would just say one thing that really drew me to this was how easy it is. I mean, of course, we're not doing a commercial for these books, right? It's up to you whether that's something you want to explore. But one of the things that I find really attractive about this is it's very highly researched. It has a huge effect size. There's a ton of mountains of resources that are available for free online. Those are linked in our spreadsheet as well that we've shared with you. And yet, having a book like that takes you through and has lesson plans that are already laid out for you, that proceduralize that fading of supports as you'll see, I think that's invaluable as a teacher. It's so rare for high quality research like that to be translated so well for those of us who are in the field. And so I think that's a huge advantage.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we have a sample lesson that you'll look at tonight, so you can see exactly what Amanda's talking about as far as like the ease and use of some of the strategies and the way that it's really set up nicely for teachers. So go ahead, Amanda, you can go to the next slide. So this kind of speaks to what Amanda had just mentioned about, thinking about how it provides these scaffolds and this fading of support so that students start to own the strategies and the use of those strategies on their own. So you can see that when we consider explicit direct instruction, that's what EDI stands for, it includes those 8 components that you see listed there, right? So we know that a really solid lesson, when it's direct and explicit, incorporates stating the objective, activating that prior knowledge. I'm not going to read all of those to you, but you can see all those different components. It has that guided practice portion embedded in, and then it eventually requires students to independently practice when they're ready. When you consider folding in and integrating the SRSD strategies or stages, sorry, we're going to take a look at those in a minute. There's 6 of them. And so you can see how they're kind of nested under or within, I guess you could say, within, a very explicit lesson. So you can see that step 1 is building and developing that background knowledge. And then steps 2, 3, and 4 can include discussion around the strategy. It includes you as the teacher modeling, which we know as teachers we do very often and all the time. But it also includes that explicit step of or stage of memorization. And that's kind of what we had been talking about when we think about and consider those mnemonics and some of the other helpful tools that you'll see specifically in a lesson that we'll take a look at here shortly. From there, it obviously provides support. So students will be practicing and the teacher is supporting along the way. And then ultimately, the end goal is that last stage of that independent practice. And so getting students to um, really own it, the utilization of the strategies on their own so they are able to compose. Hopefully, what we want is a really legible, beautiful piece of writing. So, Amanda, you can go to the next slide. Um, so you can see, here's an example of a graphic organizer, or I guess you'd say a mnemonic that students could utilize to help in supporting drafting or composing a writing piece. But what this slide is illustrating is that fading of support. So you would intentionally teach students to utilize something such as TIDE that you see here, where you have like the topic introduction and you have the important ideas and details, and then you have your conclusion or your ending. And you're teaching students to use that along the way to organize their writing. You're teaching them to memorize that mnemonic. You're supporting them along the way. And then the goal is eventually that you could take that away from students. And whenever they need to use it, they would be able to pull it from their tool belt or their toolbox and utilize it to help them, compose a piece of writing. And that the ultimate goal is that they no longer have to use that, but when they do, they don't require your help and support. They're able to utilize those self-regulated strategies on their own.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in here to say, some of you might be thinking, oh, this reminds me of race or some of those other mnemonics and tools that you've used in the past to help kids prepare for the state test or to become better writers. And I would say, yeah, it is. It's pretty similar in some ways. But as we go through the rest of this session tonight, I want you to pay particular attention to the explicitness in which this is taught, because I think it's different than how, some of those strategies are sometimes presented in other books or on blogs or so forth. And I also, as Janelle just pointed out, want you to pay attention to that fading of support as well, because it's really intentional.
Yeah, if you click to the next slide, Amanda, that's exactly right. Like what Amanda's talking about there is these steps are what she's speaking to as like the explicit parts of this. So it's not just putting up, an anchor chart of TIDE saying, okay, you have to have a topic sentence, you have to have your ideas and your details and your ending sentence or your concluding sentence, and then you keep referring back to that anchor chart. But there's some specific instructional moves and practices and steps that you're doing as the teacher to help fade that support along the way so that students are taking ownership of it. And so you can see the different stages that we took a look at on a few slides ago. But one of the things that you do want to remember as you dig into the SRSD strategies a little more is that this is not set in stone. It doesn't mean that you have to do every single part every single time if that's not what your students needs. They can be used, the stages can be used flexibly and recursively. They can be combined in some ways if your students are ready for that. The goal is that the SRSD strategies meet your students where they are and provide supports until all students are able to do these things independently or work independently. So you'll see that first stage, like we talked about, is building background knowledge. So this is where you start to talk about the necessary vocabulary that's needed for the new learning and the writing that's going to occur. And within this, the other component that you want to consider including is developing self-instructions relevant to the composition. So helping the students to think through, like, what is their internal talk going to look like, and how are they going to work through organizing their writing? And when they get stuck, what are they going to do? How are they going to work through that? And so this is where you're explicitly teaching those things and developing those things along the way with students. You're helping them to develop this positive self-talk, because we know that there's power in that. When you move to step 2, you can see that this is where you're starting to really talk about the specific writing strategy that you're utilizing. And you're talking about how it's supporting their organization, and you're talking about the benefits of utilizing that to help support their writing. When you move to stage 3, this is where modeling occurs. This can be from the teacher. It could be from, if you have a really strong, peer in the classroom that you could provide a model for. But this step is really necessary. The modeling is so important that you don't want to skip this step. And so this is where you're talking through, if you've introduced something like Tide, you're showing them how you're utilizing Tide to create that piece of writing. When you're getting stuck, what are you saying to yourself? What positive self-talk are you using? And then from there, you want to move to the memorization stage, which I also think is really important not to skip, because we can't utilize what we don't memorize, right? So if it's not in our long-term memory and we're not able to access it, then it's kind of useless for us. And so we have to spend time memorizing the strategies so that the students are able to then employ them when we're not there to provide and extend those supports any longer. This is even the phase where you can start to help students memorize those self-instruction steps that you've created with them at the very beginning of the lesson. And from there, then that's when you are providing supports, and you're essentially giving feedback and acting as a coach along the way, right? You're the facilitator at this point. So the students are using the strategy, and you're providing that explicit, direct, timely feedback where and when it's needed. And that looks different for different students, of course. But we know that obviously this is where those students that especially struggle to write are going to need more support than other students that maybe are more proficient writers. And finally, then you move into that independent practice phase. So this is where the students are composing something completely independent on their own, and they're employing those strategies and self-instruction steps as needed, which is the ultimate goal of SRSD, that you're able to walk away from the students and they're able to execute utilizing these strategies on their own. So with that, we want to give you time to explore some of the specific writing strategies. And so this is where you will see we've pulled these from some of those ready to use lessons, and you'll notice some of the specific graphic organizers and the mnemonics that are included here on this chart. These do come from the resource that we mentioned earlier, Powerful Writing Strategies for All Students. But like Amanda said, we don't want you to think that we're just advocating for the use of one resource. This is just a starting point for us, and we'll continue to expand and grow that resource bank for you as we continue on this journey of talking about writing together throughout the next year and beyond. So we'll put you in great breakout rooms based on where you indicated you wanted to be. And we just want to give you time to explore the different strategies that are linked here, and really talk about at your grade level, like which ones do you see being helpful at your grade level? How would you utilize them? Where do you see the practicality? Where do you see it? Which ones would be most essential for you to utilize maybe at your grade level? Which ones would you take back and share with people in your district and in your teams? And what we want you to do during your time together as you explore these is just to identify one person who will report out from each grade level. We have you set up in grade levels K through 5. And we'll give you approximately, what do you think, Amanda, like 8 minutes?
Yeah, I just added the timer for about 8 minutes.
Perfect. And do you want to talk about the resource document linked there too?
Oh, sure. If you all want to, it's not going to be, Janelle, could you add her to the group, Nicole, while I'm talking through this real quick?
Sure.
Right now on that resource document that's linked, I just basically took the slides that are linked here and turned them into totally black and white resources that could be information sheets if you want to provide them for your students, as almost like a mini anchor chart to put in a folder or a binder. I'm working on a couple graphic organizers. I didn't get all of them into that sheet. There are a few that have been added already. I think Tide is in there and maybe Tree. We'll keep adding more as we go. And again, on that resource document, you'll find some other resources too, like Think SRSD that have some freebies. I wouldn't hop in there just yet. That might be for later after the meeting if your interest is piqued, because you could go down a rabbit hole. We'd like you just to spend some time looking kind of at the things that are in this menu. What you'll see are basically the mnemonics. It just basically shows you across the top what kind of writing that they are appropriate for and what they support, and what the mnemonic is. And then we will take a closer look at one of them, so you'll start to get an idea of how to support the teaching of these strategies.
Yeah. So I agree with Amanda. You really don't want to access the resource document right now for the sake of what you're going to explore. But I didn't want to move on and forget to mention that we are starting to add some of these things to that resource document, so things are housed in one place for you. It's going to serve you very well, and you're going to get more from accessing the links on the chart that you see here.
Welcome back, everybody. I guess let's start with fifth grade, and we'll work our way backwards. Could somebody from fifth grade just kind of share something about where your conversation landed, and then we'll work our way backwards.
So when we were looking in fifth grade, we found that we really liked the tree, where it's the topic sentence, the reasons, explain the reasons, and then examine.
Because they're like, it sounds like
we do a lot with, we've noticed that like our kids struggle a little bit with that. We also liked the WWW one, about like who's the main character, it's tiny, it's hard for me to see it. Like what's happening with the character and all of those parts as well, because we found, especially with this year's kids, they really seem to be struggling with the basics. Even they can't even remember to capitalize I when they're writing. And I know part of it is these was the group that went home in second grade with during COVID, and there's a motivation factor there that they are missing, along with some of these basic skills that they've been taught all these other years, but it's like there's other worries that they've had and they haven't focused on a lot of these kind of things.
Thank you so much. Anybody from her group want to add anything else before we hear from fourth grade? Okay, fourth grade.
Hi, it's me, Michelle. There's just two of us in fourth grade tonight. So we were just talking about, I'm trying to think of the lady's name. She was from Canton. But just what we've used in the past. Like we've done a lot of the race strategies before. Looking into the tree, like fifth grade was saying, would be a great piece for those, and just the simplicity of it, just keeping it simple. But that's kind of where our conversation went.
Thank you. Third grade.
We talked about how the strategies do seem somewhat similar to things we've used in the past, like somebody wanted better than and race. And we like the fact that there's a mnemonic for them to memorize so that they can use that as a tool. We felt a little bit overwhelmed by the number of tools that there were, but I guess we're just getting our first glance at them. We thought it would be good for test prep in terms of helping them to address a prompt, but there were some concerns. One curiosity I had was I wanted to hear more about like the self-regulation and motivation portion of this. I feel like I just need to know more about that. I don't feel like I know enough about that yet and how that sets this strategy apart. And we started to talk a little bit about what we're already using. A few of us have dipped our toe into Writing Revolution, that book, and tried to use some strategies from that. So we started to discuss what we liked and didn't like about that so far.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about self-regulation. It's going to be still kind of introductory tonight, but it's something that we'll keep coming back to. I think it has implications for most things that we do, and there are some lessons we can learn from this strategy and apply in other areas of our class as well. Thank you, Heather. Second grade, anything to add?
I guess we forgot to ask, figure out who was going to share out. We a lot of similar things. Did think there was a lot of things there, but the time to get into it, trying to find the time to implement this as we're working so hard on becoming readers, and then now trying to also get that writing in and how to fit it all in was a lot of our conversation as to how do we streamline this to help it would this make it an easier thing for our students than if we really do that explicit instruction with it. It's going to take time, but our benefits of it maybe would be definitely in our best interest.
Thank you. First grade, did you have any musings about this? I know it gets a little bit to be more of a stretch for first grade and kindergarten to use a strategy like this with all of your kiddos, but for kids who are writing paragraphs, as you're structuring some of those beginning compositions, what came to mind for first grade?
Daniel put something in the chat. He put
That's right.
microphone problems, but for when we get to first grade's turn, talking about how some of these strategies could be good to be done verbally when they're only writing at the sentence level, modeling and practicing the writing process through dialogue.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Janelle and I had some conversations about that, like in kindergarten and first grade, how you could talk through this with the group using a shared experience or a shared story that you've read and put it in the pocket chart, or get some things on sentence strips and rearrange them and help them learn the structure of, a paragraph, even if they are not writing it independently necessarily.
Yeah, I think that is something that I think is relevant and necessary to think about, is that even though, we've really been focused on the goal is that students are utilizing these strategies independently on their own, kindergarten and first grade teachers, the opportunities that you have to do it through that oral aspect and modeling is then building that staircase for when they get to second grade and third grade and beyond. That if you're building it so well through the oral aspect and the modeling aspect, that's setting them up for success then when they get to the upper grades. So that's that valuable and key piece for K-1.
Yeah, so with that in mind, if kindergarten, I know it was a little bit harder for you all to engage because of the level of writing that you're doing in kindergarten, but even if somebody in the kindergarten group would like to speak to the importance of laying that strong foundation with sentence level writing and the handwriting piece, like how does that help us to be successful with these strategies when they get to second grade and beyond? I'd love to hear that.
We were just saying how we have to model absolutely everything for these little guys. Like right now, I'm teaching capital letters, so they're still learning those capital letters. So to write a complete sentence using a capital, they still have to think about how to make that.
Mm-hmm.
And we were also saying that all of our kids are at different levels, because we have some kids that know the letters and we have others that don't, and it's just really hard. It's not hard, but it's just a challenge to get all these kids at different levels doing what they can do.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's all good. And when we share this, with the big group K-5, we recognize that certain strategies are going to look different in different grade levels. And what the work that you all do in kindergarten and first grade and laying the foundation is so important. It is so important. I think about, again, as somebody who spent most of my teaching time in those intermediate grades, about how difficult it was to navigate complex writing when kids still lacked those foundational skills. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you're all doing that work and that you're not feeling rushed or pressured into rushing into using a strategy like this and having them write independently at this stage. So keep doing all the good work that you're already doing. Janelle, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that a majority, I think Kelly really hit it on the head, right? Like a majority of your focus is going to be in that transcription phase at K-1. And what Judy Dodson would be so happy to hear is that the more support and modeling you can do through that oral language aspect, the better off for your students as they venture through the upper grades. And that we still, even at those upper grades, are building and developing that oral language, right? But the real importance of that at the beginning grades is so necessary. So.
All right, I'm putting that slideshow in one more time. For those of you who had trouble finding it, slide 34 was where that menu starts. Okay, well, thank you all for sharing. We are going to, at this time, take a little bit of a closer look at SRSD, that self-regulated strategy development. And we're going to begin by taking a look at PAL plus tree. The lesson that you are going to take a look at with us tonight is done after they have some exposure to the PAL portion of it. So it teaches them a little bit more about tree, because by the point that you would be teaching this, you would have already taught them that PAL means pull apart the prompt, organize my notes, write and say more. And just at a rudimentary level, those of you who are preparing your kids for a state assessment, you know that that's important, right? That I can look at this assessment, I can figure out what they're asking me in the prompt. I can organize my notes or my thinking, and then I'm going to write, and I'm going to provide that evidence or elaboration for that. And not only is it important on a state test, it's important to be good communicators in writing in general. So that other side of this gives them a structure for writing an expository text. So if they're asked to write an informational text in response to a prompt, they can use tree, which asks them to provide a topic sentence, 3 reasons or more, to explain their reasons, and then to examine it ultimately, to double check themselves. Did I have all of my parts? Did I do what I needed to answer this essay prompt? And so you'll notice across the bottom, just something that Janelle added that I think is an important consideration as we start to look through this. Again, we're moving from what we just discussed, those oral scaffolds in K and 1, where we're talking through maybe writing with sentence strips or orally an informational paragraph about something we've read or experienced together, into providing these very sequential scaffolds so that students eventually will be able to independently apply these without the aid of a graphic organizer or a teacher, peeking over their shoulder to support this work. So on the next slide, you'll see just as we think about PAL plus tree within this book, one of the cool things about it is for each of these strategies, it provides 5 lessons for younger students, and they're intended to be sequential lessons. So we're going to take a look at just the very first one, and then there will be 4 more lessons about that strategy that will move them toward that independent use. So just know that when we're looking at this, it's not going to take your students all the way there by the end of this first lesson, but you're going to see how you begin teaching one of these strategies. There are also 5 lessons here for older kids. So if you teach older students, there would be a higher level lesson for those kiddos in this book. And then they list many materials that you can find in here that are already ready for you to photocopy and use. On this next slide, it starts to show you, and Janelle, could you, while I'm talking through this, would you mind putting the lesson or getting the lesson ready so that they're ready to look at that in the chat? I'm going to take you through the very beginning parts of what's in this lesson plan. And then we're going to ask you to take a look at different components by grade level to come back and report out. So first thing first, for each lesson, they give you kind of an overview. They tell you what it is that you're going to be focusing on with your students. So this lesson's focused on developing students' background knowledge of persuasive writing. It is focused on discussing strategies. And then there's a part towards the end focused on establishing partners for transfer, because the idea is I don't want you just to use the strategy for this lesson, for this writing assignment, or just for reading. I want you to use it across classes, across your lifetime, right, to be able to write well and to write persuasively. Then they have the student objectives listed for you already, that they will state orally what makes a good opinion essay, that they'll be able to find essay parts in an essay that's read in class, and that they'll be able to orally state the meaning of that transfer. And then they list the materials that you'll need. And all of those things are in that book. You just have to print them out to be ready to use it, other than the paper and pencils and all that stuff that you have to provide yourself. All the handouts are there. And basically they set the context for student learning at the beginning of this lesson. And it says, tell the students that they will be learning a new writing trick that will help them write a paper that tells the readers what they think about a certain topic. This is called an opinion essay. And then it tells you discuss the words opinion and essay to ensure that students understand the meaning of the terms. And think about how important that is for students to understand academic vocabulary, to recognize on a prompt or in your directions what kind of writing you're asking for. So you're laying the foundation for that. On the next slide, you see the next part of this lesson, where this is step 1, where we're developing background knowledge. It says review PAL, because remember I said they've already learned it maybe by this point. If they haven't, if you're jumping right in here, it would be important to teach that as well, right? This is kind of assuming that you already have. So you're reviewing PAL. You put out that PAL plus tree mnemonic chart so that only PAL shows. And maybe you made this into an anchor chart of some sort that's displayed on your wall. You're asking students to tell you what PAL represents, and then reminding them that PAL gives them the power when they write stories. And it can give them power when they're writing their opinion. And you remind them that PAL stands for pick my idea, organize my notes, write and say more. So in this case, they are choosing that topic to write about. And then they are describing and discussing what makes an opinion powerful. It notes here that, of course, students might not be familiar with that concept. So we would be explicit and we would tell them an opinion essay is powerful when it tells a reader what the writer believes, gives a reader at least 3 reasons why he or she believes it, and has an ending sentence. And it says you'll be practicing this with them. You just want to make sure they have that general idea of those criteria at the front end. And then it says a powerful opinion essay makes sense and has several parts. Tell the students that they will learn a trick for remembering the parts of a good opinion essay. Okay. So that is that developing background knowledge. You'll see here there are 6 more steps. So you're going to introduce tree, find parts in an opinion essay, introduce the organizer, practice tree, find parts in a second essay, and then establish writing partners. And this is just lesson 1. There are 4 more lessons that come after this that really help cement this process and help students be able to use it independently. So we have assigned a grade level to each step. We'll send you to a breakout room just to talk through that component. It's linked here, and Janelle just put it in the chat as well. And Janelle, how many minutes do you think we want to give them for this?
How about if we shoot for like 5 or 6?
And if you guys get done early, if you could, you can feel free to come back to the main room so that we know we're ready to move on. We don't want it to bog down our time together. All right.
Amanda, are you putting in the time, or you want me to?
I am doing it right now. Does anyone have questions for us before we send you out? You basically just need to talk through that one step. So on your document, you'll just look at that little section and talk through what it is that the teacher is responsible for doing in that step.
And when you come back, just be prepared to share with the group. So become like an expert on just that one step and share with the group what that step entails.
All right. Any questions before we send you off? Okay, we'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. Okay, we're going to start with kindergarten with step 2. Who is going to talk to us about how to introduce tree?
Okay. We were just saying that for kindergarten level, that this is actually a great example of teaching it to the kids because they all know what a tree is. And when we break it down, we can make sure that, okay, yeah, we have an opinion and everybody has an opinion. So that's, what the topic sentence would be. And what are your reasons for that opinion? And in our social studies and science lesson, we talk about the roots. So they all know that the roots would be they're supporting that tree. They need those roots to grow that, to make that tree grow. And then the earth is where the roots wrap around. So, okay, let's wrap up. Tell me, why again you like that opinion or you feel that opinion, and then examine, does that make sense? Let's look at this picture. Does your opinion make sense? So yeah, we actually all thought that this would apply very well to kindergarten.
Great. Thanks. Yeah. So those of you, if you get a chance to look at step 2 later, what it does nicely is it's metaphor basically. So the topic sentence is the trunk that's strong. Every part of the tree is connected to it. Every part of the writing is connected to it. Those reasons are the roots. They support the trunk, right? And the stronger the roots, the stronger the tree. The ending is the earth. Again, like Kelly said, it wraps around the tree. It wraps it up. And then you have that examining to make sure that everything is there and that it all makes sense. So thank you for wrapping that up in the nice testimonial too. All right, so step 3, once you've introduced that mnemonic, that concept, now what, first grade?
No one wanted to talk, so I'll go ahead and talk. So really on the lesson, I mean, it really very nicely takes you through the steps. And I think when you're finding the parts of an opinion essay, especially with younger kids, since, we were first grade, I mean, so much of this is done together, although I think it would be to their probably benefit for everyone to do it together. We were discussing how hard it is for opinions because most kids really don't know what their opinion is at this point. So, I mean, they might have an opinion about certain things, but possibly not the things that we're asking them to have an opinion about. So, and how to support it. Like they don't really know past I like it or, those type of just very vague things. So, in here, identifying what the opinion is and then the topic sentence and having them underline it and rereading it together and how it shows the different reasons why.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I like that it starts with a mentor text, right? It's showing you what an author did. You're not responsible yet for doing this on your own. You're going to find it in a passage together. All right. Second grade, introducing the organizer. Notice that's not the first thing. That's different than some of the strategies that we've used in the past, right? We're not jumping right to putting that race organizer out in front of them. In this case, the tree organizer. How are we introducing that second grade? Is there anyone from second grade who'd be willing to take us through that step?
Sorry, don't judge my 2-year-old in the background. We talked about how it is basically just taking notes and helping them know how to take notes and not having to write every little detail, and then reordering them and examining it at the end, kind of.
Wonderful. Did everyone catch the nice modeling that Alicia did of how wonderful oral language development is? I heard that notes in the background. It's wonderful. Okay, third grade, how do you practice tree once you've done all of those steps?
You asked for third grade, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we talked, it's really just the memorization piece. So they need to know what tree stands for, and they need to be able to tell you that without looking at it. And if they can't, you have to do it again.
Good. Yeah, and that's that retrieval practice, right? Janelle and I have talked about that multiple times, just the research that supports that. The difference between giving kids a recap and actually having them do the mental effort of retrieving the knowledge themselves and strengthening those pathways in the brain to be able to keep it in long-term memory over time. So thank you for that. 4th grade, finding the parts in a second essay, step 6.
So Sherry and I talked about how at this point you take their pencils away and they have, you still have the tree mnemonic up on the board, and then you go ahead and you're going to be looking for transition words and using the graphic organizer.
Thank you. And examining all those parts collaboratively during that piece. And then lastly, 5th grade, would you talk about the part about writing partners?
Sure. So they're supposed to have a writing partner. Didn't explain that too much, but it sounded like just somebody they're going to touch base with. And then we're also encouraging them to use this strategy in other classes. And then there's supposed to be a chart that you then share back, kind of like, you know, how kids have said that they've used it in other classes. One thing we noticed too, that this was said it was a lesson for younger kids, and we weren't sure exactly how that would go over with 5th grade. So I'm curious to see what the older lesson would be like, if it's completely the same or if parts of it have been tweaked a little bit.
Yeah. We didn't look closely at that lesson before while we were planning this, so I can't answer that for you right now. So any big impressions as you've listened to each of the steps? Any thoughts about usefulness? Again, this is one lesson out of 5 in a series that you would go through to get to the point where they're using this more independently. Any thoughts? Even just like musings about the explicitness of this lesson, because that's one of the things that stands out to me compared to back in the days when I was using Lucy Calkins. There's a different level of explicitness here. Any thoughts from anybody?
I think it'd be very helpful, just because I think they just need very strategic ways of thinking and seeing it laid out, just because they really just don't know. And I, for 4th grade, I think it'd be helpful. I don't know if it was for 4th grade, but I think it'd be really helpful to them.
Yeah, I think the systematic part of it would be really helpful as well. You know, I'd love to be more creative, but I think that I'm seeing the gaps that they need this structure.
Yeah, and I think when I was a teacher, I worried sometimes about being too formulaic for too long, right? Well, one of the things I like about this that we didn't see because we only did the first lesson and not all 5 is that release, that gradual fading of supports to get them to independent use. And we know that the more you do something, and I'll be honest, there are things I've done in my own schoolwork now as a student, again, that has started out kind of formulaic. Like I'll look at the worked example, I'll look at what somebody else has done. And over time, you start to have more ownership, you have more skills, you can start to make it your own, and it doesn't feel like you're putting it in a box. And it's the same thing with our students. Sometimes it helps to be explicit and a little bit formulaic in the beginning, but eventually they're not necessarily going to do topic, sentence, reason, explanation. They might be able to play a little bit more with that writing craft as they gain proficiency in the structure, right? Once they have the structure, then they can add that craft. But I think sometimes we were jumping really quickly to the craft without having that strong structure in place in other programs. And again, this isn't a program. This is something you can just use to layer on top of your existing programs, which is another added benefit. Janelle, do you have anything to add, or anybody else?
Okay. I would just add that if you could use it over several grade levels, it'd be really helpful, because I find that we're all just grasping for whatever works for us individually, and it would be so helpful if we were all speaking in the same language for the kids.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true for so many things.
Yeah, very good point, Heather. That if they hear that consistent language across the grade levels, the ownership that students would be able to take with it then, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, this slide just shows that wrap up then for the lesson. And it's just focused again on getting kids ready for using it. So they tell you at the end of the lesson to tell kids that tomorrow they'll be responsible for telling you the steps again. So it's that continuous retrieval practice, because we know that that's the most efficient way to review and it's going to equip them to be able to use this independently in the future. And then this slide just shows you how flexible this strategy is. It really nests well within that UDL and differentiation conversation, because you can modify these graphic organizers. So to your point, Heather, if we're talking about using this in different grade levels, if we're talking about self-talk and some of those goals that we're going to set for kids, this is where that comes into play. So on that far left side, you see some color coding. And it uses some symbols that they use in Step Up to Writing, which is a writing program that uses that color coding system in those graphics. So I can just layer that all into my graphic organizer if that's a program that I'm using. And you can see I have some little embedded checklists as well. So do I have a hook? Did I say my title and my author? Did I restate the prompt? Did I give a topic statement, right? I can put those specific things. So think about the state assessment again, or the rubrics that you're using for writing. You can embed some little checklists here to help students remember to embed some of those components. So you'll see evidence and elaboration in the middle, and that's what those two columns are. My evidence is going to be yellow, my elaboration is going to be red, and then my ending is at the end, where I restate the topic sentence and I share an enduring understanding of that text. In the middle, you see the graphics went away. I don't have the check boxes. I'm going to see if my kids can remember those things that I want them to have without those supports. Notice I've added an extra box. I'm going to ask them to have an additional piece of evidence and elaboration, perhaps. And then that far right one, it's more of an advanced, like, let's say middle school, 5th grade, maybe even example, where maybe I'm not using the color support on this graphic organizer. Maybe my check boxes are a little bit more sophisticated. So now I'm asking for a hook and a thesis statement. I'm looking for you to use citations or to paraphrase. I'm asking your ending to restate that thesis statement, to share that enduring understanding. And again, you can just see, like, depending on what your rubric is, depending on the expectations for whether it's a state test that you're preparing for or whatever it might be, you can flexibly create these. You could even at the top, if you look at the two on the left, there's a space for a goal, right? So if there's a child in your class who has an IEP and has a writing goal, or you have a student who struggles with perfectionism, right? You can give them some of that self-talk, those goals, those things to say back to themselves that can be written and included on those graphic organizers as well. Any questions or thoughts about the flexibility, the ability to create even different templates to use for different kids within your room while still using the same strategy? Any thoughts here? So there's a quick video here, and I don't think I'm going to play it for the sake of time. What do you think, Chanel, or should we? I know we're running short.
I don't know. It's almost 5 minutes, so I don't necessarily have a bunch of time. I don't want to keep them over.
Yeah, so this is there for you. So Heather and others that are more interested in the self-talk components, we'll come back to this knowing that we're running a little short. But this is a great video that introduces the value of that within this component. It's a 5-minute video that you could take a look at, and feel free to follow up with us. This slide just pretty much gives an overview of what we mean by this. So we have all taught kids that crumple up their papers or stare blankly at the wall, or just say, I like this, it's great. They use stuff and things and they get through the writing assignment, but it's laborious, right? So not only does a strategy or an approach like this give them really explicit parameters and support for writing, it also embeds some of these coaching points that they can begin to own and talk to themselves. It kind of goes in line with the whole growth mindset belief, right? So before I write, I can ask myself, what is this? What do I have to write? What do I have to do here? And then if I struggle with focusing and planning, I need to concentrate. First, I need to do this. First, I need the topic sentence. Then I need a piece of evidence. Then I need to say more, right? They need to be able to proceduralize this in their brain as we're teaching them these steps. There are some things while they write, coping and self-control. Like, hey, when I get frustrated when I write, I say, I can do this. I'm just going to keep going. I need to go slow and take my time. I think we take for granted that we know how to do this, right? But somebody at some point gave us that language and that belief, and that's the gift that we give our kids in the middle of these lessons. Have I used all of my parts? Or the awareness of, oops, I missed one. I should add it. I'm going to stop and add it. And then after I write, I need to refer to my strategy reminder and reflect on this. Did I do everything I was supposed to do? And those self-reinforcing things. I like this ending. I don't know. You guys probably feel like that sometimes. You write something or you share something with a kid and you're like, oh, that was pretty good. I'll have to do that again. We want our kids to have that pride and that self-reinforcement too. So we give them the language, we affirm them, and we get them to say it to themselves, right? That's part of this. Okay, any closing thoughts about that before Janelle winds us down with some other announcements and things? Any last thoughts about SRSD? Just the introduction that we've had tonight. You can feel free to put them in the chat too if you want. Or express if you have an interest in digging a little deeper into this with us over time. Awesome. I'm happy to see that, that some of you have seen value in this tonight. I think it's something that takes some time to dig into. It's not something you just come to this meeting and you leave and you're like, I know exactly what to do. You know, there's some exploration involved, but we did put some things in that spreadsheet. As I create more resources, as we find more tools, we'll continue to fold those in. And we'll continue to chat more about other writing strategies as well, because we want to continue to do things like sentence expansion and sentence combining and all those skills we've talked about in the past that are helpful as well. All right. So Janelle, if you want to take it away. I'll put the title of the book in the chat one more time.
Can you go to the next slide, Amanda? So these last few slides are just kind of some housekeeping items. So we just want to remind people or make people aware of the High Impact Conference for Educators that will be held June 13th and 14th. And obviously, we would love for you to join. And if anybody has, something that they really feel they want to share with the educators in our county, please know that you can submit proposals to present a session. And it doesn't have to be long. It can be, 15 minutes, half hour. We're not looking for people to present for, hour and a half sessions, but just want to throw that out there and encourage you all to consider that, because we know you have good things to share that are happening in your classrooms. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Amanda. Also, just we received this just yesterday, I think. If you're interested, or if you typically have attended this in the past, Malone University is hosting a literacy celebration on Saturday, April 22nd. And you can see all the details here and how to register, etc. So they will be featuring Deborah Wiles, an author that is an author who's written a variety of books, not just for elementary level, but also the upper level. So they encourage teachers at all levels to attend.
I can hop in here if you want.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. So
this is from a website I just put in the chat. It's called Think SRSD. They have free resources and things that you can investigate for SRSD. They have links to all these other resources if you want to learn more, but they just happened to send me an email. I said it was meant to be. It was serendipitous. Yesterday, I got an email from them, and they were saying that they have 2 free trainings coming up. The bummer is one's right smack in the middle of your day around noon. If you're a coach, maybe you'll have some space for that. Otherwise, they're offering some at 7 p.m. I signed up. I'm not sure if you get a recording if you can't make it during that time. So it may be worth signing up even on that off chance. But nevertheless, because they were free, we were talking about it, I wanted to make sure you were aware of it.
And then just in being proactive, these are the dates for next year's lead educator meetings. We hope that you will continue to join us. So you can have we thought it would be helpful if you have the dates ahead of time. And one of the big things that we do want to note is that we, with the plans and looking ahead to kind of our vision and where we're headed next with this group, we are going to move our meetings to in-person next year. And we have, really been intentional and thought through a variety of reasons for that. We're really going to start to dig in. You guys have been on this journey for quite some time and, have this really solid knowledge about the science of reading. And so we really want to dig into the implementation portions of like how does this look in the classrooms? And we want to allow for that culture of collaboration and modeling and watching videos together and just exploring implementation at a really deep level. And so that's our reasoning for moving to in-person. So we just wanted to make sure you were aware of that and put that on your radar as you think about next year already, which is crazy. And I think that's it. Is there anybody have any questions or anything before we sign off for the evening? We appreciate your time. Amanda dropped the link for registering for the webinars in the chat, so you can access that if you need it.
Actually, those are different links.
Oh, that's the Iris thing.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I linked to another free module if you wanted to find out a little bit more about it without attending the webinar. It's a free module from the Iris Center.
From the Iris Center, yeah.
And then I did link to that Think SRISD page that has some free resources. But there's links to those webinars in our spreadsheet that we shared with you that has all of our meeting information in it.
And the link to the book that the Powerful Writing Strategies is in there too. So,
yep. So thank you all for joining us. We know, again, we both remember attending these meetings after a long day in the classroom. We know the sacrifice that it is for your families and grading and all of those things. So we just appreciate your commitment to learning with us. So take care. Enjoy your spring breaks. Enjoy the rest of your year. And if you have any questions or need anything, please feel free to reach out. We are happy to connect. And if you need anything, we'll hang around for just a few minutes as people are jumping off if you have any specific questions. Take care, everyone.